there's this beautiful poem. It's in the book of Isaiah.
The city of Jerusalem has just been destroyed by Babylon, a great kingdom in the north. And all of these Jewish people, they've been sent away into exile, but a few remained in the city. And they're left wondering, what just happened? Has our God abandoned us?
Right, because Jerusalem was supposed to be the city where God would reign over the world to bring peace and blessing to everyone.
Now, Isaiah had been saying that Jerusalem's destruction was a mess of Israel's own making. They had turned away from their God, become corrupt, and so their city and their temple were destroyed.
Yeah, everything seems lost.
But the poem goes on. There's a watchman on the city walls, and far out on the hills we see a messenger, and he's running towards the city. He's running and he's shouting, "Good news!" And Isaiah says, "How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news."
Beautiful feet?
Yes, the feet are beautiful because they're carrying a beautiful message.
What's the message?
That despite Jerusalem's destruction, Israel's God still reigns as king, and that God himself is going to one day return to this city, take up his throne, and bring peace.
And the watchmen sing for joy because of the good news that their God still reigns.
Now in the New Testament, we find this same phrase, the good news. It's the Greek word euangelion, and it's also sometimes translated with the word gospel.
Yeah, so when Christians say, "Do you believe the gospel?" they mean, do you believe the news?
But not just any news. In the Bible, this phrase is always about the announcement of the reign of a new king. And in the New Testament, the Gospels use this phrase to summarize all of Jesus' teachings. They say that he went about proclaiming the good news of God's kingdom.
So Jesus saw himself as the messenger, bringing the news that God reigns.
Yes, but the way that he described God's reign, it surprised everybody. I mean, think, a powerful, successful kingdom. It needs to be strong, able to impose its will, able to defeat its enemies. But Jesus said the greatest person in God's kingdom was the weakest, the one who loves and who serves the poor. And he said that you live under God's reign when you respond to evil by loving your enemies and forgiving them and seeking peace. This is an upside-down kingdom.
Now, Jesus also said that this kingdom was arriving with him.
Yeah, so for example, there's this really interesting story where there's a high-ranking Roman officer, and he comes to Jesus begging him to heal his servant. And he even calls Jesus his Lord, acknowledging that Jesus is his authority. Jesus praises this man for recognizing what no one else yet had, that not only was Jesus announcing God's kingdom, he was the king.
And so the word gets out that this Jewish man from Galilee is talking and acting like he's the king of Israel. He's appointing 12 disciples, which are an image of Israel's 12 tribes. He's healing people, forgiving people their sins.
And all of this so threatened Israel's leaders that they finally decide to have him killed. And Jesus let them.
Yeah, which is a weird thing to do if you're trying to become king.
That's right. But for Jesus, this is what had to happen. Jesus saw the sin and the devastation of his people Israel as just one small part of the entire human condition. How all humanity has rebelled against God, resulting in the tragedy and devastation of our whole world. And so how is God going to bring his reign over such a world? Jesus believed it would be through an act of sacrificial love for his enemies. This is why in the Gospels, Jesus' crucifixion is depicted as his enthronement as the King of the Jews.
Yeah, he receives a crown. He also receives a robe.
He's exalted up, not onto a throne, but onto the cross.
How beautiful are the feet that bring good news.
And the good news now is that Jesus has defeated death and that he reigns as king, that he's dealt with our sin and corruption himself and that he's conquered it with his life and with his love.
And then Jesus sends his followers to go out and keep announcing this good news of the upside-down kingdom.
And to invite everyone to give their allegiance to him, the king who defeated death with his love.
I love this video. It's beautiful. I mean, to watch, it's beautiful. They're all beautiful.
Yeah, sure.
But
Yeah.
this is beautiful
Yeah.
in a really unique way.
Yeah, I agree. You know, actually, the Gospel of the Kingdom video is my personal favorite of all the ones that we have ever made. It was an early video in the project, but it captures something about both the biblical story, but the heartbeat of Jesus and his inversion of our sets of value and power and what we care about in a way that's just, this is something about Jesus that's always captured my imagination and my heart. And this video does it better than I could ever talk about it because it had brilliant artists involved. So I'm with you.
You like it too.
I appreciate this. That's all that I'm trying to say. Is that I really
I'm
like
glad
this,
you like it. And say more
too.
about that. So you just said it now, but that you say it throughout. But the pictures of how weakness is strength and strength is weakness, and how power gets inverted, and that's good news somehow.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, good news.
Yes.
The ways that you've seen this. I mean,
well, yeah. So one is the story of Jesus, and the first or last, the greatest is the servant. Those are Jesus' just shorthand ways of saying something that he was embodying and living. And this is nowhere more evident to the two visits he has with the most powerful people in the whole story of the Gospels, which is a Roman governor and the high priest. And you can just tell from both of his encounters that he could have cared less about their status. He barely even talks to them.
Carpenter's son.
And when he does, he kind of sticks it to him, you know? And so the people that he actually very clearly cares about are poor people with back pain, you know, and widows who just lost their children, and people with skin disease. And that's what Jesus values. And, you know, as many challenges as people have with Christianity and the church, I've yet to meet somebody who, when they see that portrait of Jesus, they aren't moved by it. There's something beautiful there. And that brings it's bringing to a culmination a whole theme all throughout the Hebrew Scriptures too, about when humans redefine what is good and bad in their own eyes, we create these artificial systems and cultures of value and status and power. And the God of the Bible just loves to stick it to us. And he'll scatter Babylon, and because they're trying to make a name for themselves, and then he'll take this no name out of that scattering and say, Abraham, I'm going to give you a great name. And that's that inversion. It's the same thing like with Hannah, the beautiful story of Hannah in Samuel, where she's not able to have any children, and her husband's other wife is able to have a lot of children. And when God enables Hannah to become pregnant, she sings this song about how God's turning the world upside down and scattering the proud. And it's that theme that the God of the Bible is on a mission to help us see what true power and value and status is. And it's precisely in the release of power to serve for the good of others. And what better summary of the story of Jesus is there? And so that's what we're trying to capture in this video.
Yeah. And it's good news somehow. I mean, that's that's good news.
Well, it's interesting. You know, it depends on the side of the tracks that you're on.
Exactly.
I guess, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. For people who don't have anything to lose, it's great news because, you know, for the widow who had just lost her son, for the woman who had bent over for all those years that he healed. I mean, these are people who they didn't just have back pain or, you know, suffering. These are people also who would have been, because of their ritual impurity in Jewish culture, and that's a whole other rabbit trail, but it would have cut their access off to the temple for a season. And so Jesus, he's creating communities where people are finding reconnection to other people and to God's presence in ways that their cultural boundaries had kept them apart. And so for people who don't have much to lose, it's a huge upgrade, the inverted power system.
But the people that have things.
But to a high priest and to a Pontius Pilate, well, it's a threat, which is Jesus sure didn't get killed for telling people to like love your neighbor as yourself. You know what I mean? He got killed for sticking it to the high priest and saying, you're going to see me ruling a little while from now. And he wasn't talking about like a military coup. He was talking about the moment that he would give up his life and take up his crown and robe on the cross and assert his power, which was to give up his power. And it's the heartbeat of what is the good news about Jesus. So I guess here's the question is, if I'm immersed in a culture of honor and status and self-made, whatever.
Do you mean a place like America?
A place like America. Like the place where we live. But it raises the question, like, what actually is good news? Is it like, hey, I've got these 3 tips to help you be more productive so that you can get that promotion? Your life might be a little better for a bit until you have no work-life boundaries and you're all of a sudden, whatever, just really unhealthy trying to make a name for yourself in your company or your career or whatever. And so maybe it actually is good news to realize that when I release my name and I release my power, what I discover is that I am more loved by my Creator than I could possibly imagine. And it has nothing to do with my status.
So this gospel is good news to the poor, inverts strength and weakness, reorients how power works. So that's lived. How are we heralds of this gospel? How do we proclaim this good news?
Well,
work?
It's a great, it's the question, right? If you're involved in a local church, much less trying to help lead and guide one. These things that we just talked about, however, if the structure and form, if the social form of my community is communicating another story about power and status, you just have to step back and ask, are we ever going to be compelling to anybody, even ourselves, that we're actually a community of this good news? I don't know, man. I say this as somebody who's trying to help lead an organization that's sharing this story with the world, and so are you through a network of church communities. But we're in a culture of leaders that is addicted to our name and spreading our name and celebrity and the social media devolution, in my opinion, it's a pandemic, another kind of pandemic that's ruining all of us. And I don't know how, but it seems to me we all individually and in our communities desperately need to find ways to make sure that the medium is as much the message, that the way our lives and communities are actually structured and do the things that they do actually are in sync with the value set of the story of Jesus. And when that disconnect grows, it becomes very obvious, especially to non-religious people. They usually catch on a lot more quickly than people in religious communities that can't see that disconnect.
We need authority to proclaim.
Yes, that's right.
But
that authority is integrity. I mean, it's just that our lives and communities actually match this inverted good news, that weak is strong and that poor is rich, and that fame is about not being famous. And it's very counterintuitive, probably right now in Western and in American culture more than ever, I think. The leaders that I am looking to and admire who are doing it best right now, to the T, are leaders that give away authority and that decentralize themselves and highlight the stories and the talents and the abilities of other people, and while also making their own contribution. And it's challenging to me, and my hunch is something like that is much more in sync with the kind of communities that Jesus envisioned in living out this good news.